The sickening clang of steel striking carbon fiber shattered the peaceful afternoon air. This was a quiet neighborhood built for decent, hard-working families. Officer Harlan Pike sneered with a deep, venomous voice. The polished cherry-red hood of the McLaren 720S now bore a deep, ugly scar. "We don't need people like you around here, with your loud jungle music and your noisy toys trying to turn this place into a crack ghetto." The baton came down again, this time across the windshield. A spider web of fractures instantly clouded the fine leather interior. From his porch, the car's owner, Darius Voss, watched the destruction unfold. His elegant crimson silk shirt stood in sharp contrast to the violence erupting before him. His expression was unreadable, almost amused. Harlan, consumed by a cocktail of rage and envy, had no idea he had just vandalized the property of a federal prosecutor, a man who made his living dismantling criminal empires. What happens when a bitter police officer with a superiority complex tries to intimidate a man who wields the full power of the United States judicial system? From where you're sitting, give this a like and subscribe to see how justice isn't just a verdict. It's a total demolition. The sun was a painter in this film. One afternoon, golden light bathed the carefully tended landscapes of Serenity Creek Estates in liquid gold. This was a community designed for tranquility, a place where the synchronized hiss of irrigation systems formed the daily symphony, and the most significant neighborhood drama was a passive-aggressive note from the Homeowners Association about an unauthorized garden gnome casting shade. Every house stood as a monument to upper-middle-class aspirations, with perfectly symmetrical gables, 3-car garages holding practical German sedans, and lawns so uniformly green they seemed computer-rendered. Serenity Creek was more than a neighborhood. It was a carefully curated bubble, designed, valued, and controlled to keep the messy realities of the outside world at a comfortable distance. Into this bastion of beige conformity arrived Darius Voss, not with a whisper, but with the deep, operatic roar of a high-performance engine. His vehicle was a McLaren 720S, a machine that looked less like a car and more like a predatory insect from some distant, advanced planet. Its paint, a shade called volcano red, seemed to absorb the afternoon light and exhale it as pure liquid fire. It moved with a fluid grace that belied the savage power housed within its carbon fiber chassis. The McLaren glided down the immaculate street, its engine a low, controlled murmur that deeply violated the neighborhood's unspoken acoustic code. It came to a purring stop in front of the largest house on the street, an expansive modern craftsman that had been the subject of quiet speculation for months since its completion. The moving truck that had arrived and departed the day before hadn't been a rented U-Haul, but a discreet, unmarked vehicle from a company specializing in the transport of high-value goods for discerning clients. Then the dihedral door of the McLaren opened, a silent and dramatic gesture, like the unfolding of a wing. A leg appeared, clad in tailored black linen trousers and ending in a hand-stitched Italian leather loafer. The rest of Darius Voss followed. He was a man in his 40s, tall, with the lean, powerful build of a swimmer. His skin was the deep, rich color of dark coffee, and his face was a collection of attractive, intelligent angles. But it was his shirt that made the strongest impression. It was silk, the same bold crimson as his car, and it draped over his body with effortless, fluid elegance. In a world of pastel polos and khaki shorts, he was an unapologetic flash of vibrant color. He paused for a moment, surveying his new home with an expression of quiet satisfaction. He was moving in. He was claiming the place that rightfully belonged to him. Across the street, peering through the immaculate slats of his plantation shutters, Officer Harlan Pike watched. and a familiar bitter bile rose in his throat. Harlan, a man whose 40th birthday was a recent and unpleasant memory, considered himself a pillar of Serenity Creek. He was the one who organized the neighborhood watch, the one who reported cracked sidewalks to the city, the self-appointed guardian of the community's unwritten rules. His own house, a slightly smaller but respectable colonial, was his castle, and his position as a police officer was his scepter. He had worked hard, followed the rules tours, and earned his share of this suburban paradise. Yet every fiber of his being, every deeply rooted prejudice he had carefully cultivated throughout his life, screamed that the man across the street was an intruder, an anomaly his worldview simply could not comprehend. "Sylvia, get over here," he said, knuckles white as he gripped the window frame. "You're not going to believe this." His wife, Sylvia, a woman whose blonde hair was maintained with militant regularity and whose smile was a tight, practiced performance, hurried into the living room, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it, honey? Did the Gabbles leave their trash cans out again?" "Worse," Harlan growled, his voice thick with undisguised contempt. "Much worse. Look!" He jerked his chin toward the spectacle across the street. Sylvia's eyes widened at the sight of the car, a vehicle so extravagant it seemed offensive. Then she saw Darius. Her practiced smile faded, replaced by a tight look of confusion and disgust. "Oh my God," she sighed. "Who is that? And how on earth can he afford the old Henderson estate? I heard it sold for nearly $3 million. Harlan's mind, a filing cabinet of cynical street cop assumptions, immediately began supplying answers. He didn't see a successful man. He saw a criminal profile, a rapper who'd just signed a big contract, or worse, drug money. The possibility that this man might be a lawyer, a doctor, a tech entrepreneur, a professional colleague, was a concept so foreign to his mind that he rejected it outright. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?" Harlan said, a cruel sneer twisting his lips. "This is a neighborhood for families, Sylvia. For decent, hard-working people, not for his kind." The unspoken word hung between them, heavy and ugly. Darius, apparently oblivious to the silent judgment being passed from across the street, walked up the stone path toward his new front door. He moved with a calm, confident stride, the king of a domain he had just acquired. He didn't look back at the car. He didn't need to. He knew its power, its beauty, its ability to provoke. When he reached the door, he paused and turned, surveying the quiet cul-de-sac, the identical houses, and their perfectly irrigated lawns. For a brief, tense moment, his eyes seemed to lock onto the window where the Pikes were hiding. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them. He could feel the weight of their scrutiny. A lifetime of experience had sharpened that sense in him, the sense of being watched, evaluated, and found wanting by those who saw only his skin, not his essence. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped his lips. He had hoped for a moment of peace, but as he opened the door and stepped into the cool, cavernous entryway of his new home, a familiar determination settled over him. It seemed the battle had already begun. He had just arrived, but the first shots had already been fired. The days following Darius Voss's arrival stretched into a week, and with each passing day, the crimson McLaren parked in the driveway across the street became a deeper, more personal insult to Officer Harlan Pike. It was a monument to everything he felt had been denied him. Every morning as he climbed into his municipal Ford patrol car, a bland vehicle of institutional authority, Harlan saw it. The McLaren, low and elegant, a sleeping predator, its bold color a daily mockery of his own beige existence. It wasn't just a car. It was the symbol of a world of wealth and freedom he could only glimpse on television. And its owner was a direct repudiation of the carefully constructed hierarchy that lived inside Harlan's head. In Harlan's world, Men who looked like Darius Voss did not live in $3 million houses or drive supercars worth hundreds of thousands. They were the faces on the other side of the partition in his patrol car, the subjects of traffic stops in rundown neighborhoods, the statistics in the crime reports he filed at the end of his shift. His entire career, his entire identity had been built on an us versus them foundation. Darius Voss had torn that wall down, and Harlan felt it as a personal violation. His resentment began to curdle into a low-grade, simmering obsession. "He just sits on his porch reading," Harlan would complain to Sylvia at night, peering through the blinds like a sentry guarding against an invading army. "He doesn't even seem to have a job. Where does the money come from, Sylv? You tell me." Sylvia, always the sounding board who validated her husband's anxieties, would nod. "It's suspicious, Harlan. It really is. A man his age with that kind of money just doesn't add up. And the way he dresses, that red silk shirt the other day, who does he think he is? Some kind of prince?" Their conversations became a vicious circle of suspicion and prejudice. They were detectives in their own petty drama, constructing a narrative that fit their worldview. The unmarked moving truck was obviously hiding something illicit. Darius spent his days at home. Clearly, he had no legitimate employment. The car was fast and loud, a clear sign of a criminal mindset, a desire to show off and intimidate. They built their case against him out of nothing but bitter envy, convicting him in the courtroom of their own living room. Harlan's obsession began to seep into his work. On his days off, he found himself sitting at his home computer, running unofficial searches. He looked up Darius Voss's name in every public records database he could access, hunting for a crack in the facade. He searched for criminal records, an eviction, a bankruptcy, anything that would confirm his suspicions and restore order. He found nothing. Darius Voss, according to the digital world, was a ghost. No social media presence, no public scandals, just a clean credit history and a series of addresses that indicated a steady, upward progression from a modest apartment to this, his new palace. The lack of dirt was even more exasperating to Harlan. It felt like a deliberate concealment, the mark of a man with something to hide. The envy was a sharp pain in Harlan's chest. He had been a police officer for 15 years. He worked overtime, took extra shifts, and played the politics at the station to make sergeant. He had a decent salary, a pension, and the respect, or at least the fear, of the people in his zone. He had done everything right. Yet his life was a collection of modest, sensible choices. A 4.5% mortgage, a 10-year-old Honda Pilot for the family, vacations to Disney World. For 3 years, he was a man of rules and limitations. Darius Voss, it seemed, lived in a world without them. One afternoon, Harlan watched as a van from a high-end audio company pulled up to Darius's house. Technicians spent hours installing what Harlan could only assume was a state-of-the-art sound system. Later that week, a landscape architect spent an entire day walking the property with Darius, discussing plans for a new garden and a fountain. Every new expense, every new improvement to the house was another challenge. Harlan felt his own life, his own home, shrinking in comparison. His immaculate colonial now seemed small and shabby. His reliable Honda looked like a pathetic relic. The carefully constructed pride he felt in his life was being systematically dismantled by the mere existence of the man across the street. He didn't just dislike Darius. He was beginning to hate him. It was a deep, corrosive hatred born of pure envy, a poison he willingly drank every day. And like all poisons, it was only a matter of time before it drove him to do something reckless. He was the king of his castle, and a new, richer king had built a bigger one right next door. In Harlan Pike's world, there was only room for one. After a week of silent reflection and bitter observation, Harlan Pike decided it was time to act. The passive aggression of staring through the blinds no longer satisfied his need to assert dominance. He needed to establish the hierarchy, to make it clear who was in charge of Serenity Creek. He did it under the guise of a cordial welcome, a tactic he had perfected over the years. It was a way of delivering a warning wrapped in a smile, a threat camouflaged in the language of community standards. He waited for his moment, and it came on a sunny morning. Darius was in his open garage, a clean, well-lit space that looked more like a showroom than a place for lawn equipment. He was meticulously polishing the already immaculate hood of the McLaren. A soft microfiber cloth moved in slow, deliberate circles. He wore a simple gray tracksuit and a black t-shirt. Even so, he managed to look effortlessly elegant. The garage door was open, an invitation Harlan couldn't resist. With his most experienced neighborly face on, a tight, unconvincing smile that never reached his cold gray eyes, Harlan crossed the street. He was off duty, dressed in his suburban uniform of cargo shorts and a faded polo. The fabric stretched over his growing midsection. He stopped at the edge of the driveway, arms crossed over his chest in a posture meant to look casual, but that came across as confrontational. "Morning," Harlan called out, his voice a little too loud in the quiet air. Darius looked up from his work. He didn't seem surprised or annoyed. He simply straightened, the cloth still in his hand, and met Harlan's gaze with a calm, unreadable expression. "Good morning," he replied in a soft, deep baritone. "Harlan Pike," Harlan said, stepping forward but not offering his hand. "I live right across the street. Just wanted to give you the official welcome to the neighborhood. Meant to come by earlier, but it's been a busy week." "Darius Voss," Darius said with a slight nod. "Pleasure to meet you. It's a beautiful neighborhood. Very quiet. We like to keep it that way," Harlan said, seizing the opening. His eyes moved over Darius's face, and the car with a mixture of feigned admiration and implied criticism. "That's some machine you've got there. Must have a lot of power. It's a pleasure to drive," Darius said simply, his tone neutral. "I'm sure," Harlan said, with a short, sharp, humorless laugh. "Thing is, Darius, we've got some pretty strict rules around here. The Homeowners Association is real strict about everything. You know, especially noise. People around here pay a lot for peace and quiet. No one racing up and down the streets. No loud music shaking the windows at all hours. This is a family place." Every word was a carefully chosen dart, aimed and fired. Darius's calm expression never wavered. He leaned against the car, his posture relaxed, a sharp contrast to Harlan's rigid stance. "I understand, Harlan. I chose this neighborhood for the same reason. Peace and quiet. I have no intention of disturbing it." "Good. Glad to hear it," Harlan said, though the man's unshakable composure was beginning to irritate him. He had expected some defensiveness, maybe a nervous apology. That quiet self-assurance wasn't part of the script. He decided to press harder, to bring the authority of his badge into the conversation. "Yeah, I'm a sergeant with the municipal police," he said, puffing his chest out slightly, a reflexive habit when announcing his title. "So, in a way, I end up being the unofficial enforcer of the rules around here. If there's a problem, people usually call me first, even before the Homeowners Association. Saves them a lot of paperwork, you know what I mean?" It was a clear declaration of power. "I am the law here. Cross me and you'll deal with me directly." For the first time, a flicker of something, perhaps amusement, shone in Darius's eyes. "I see. It's good to have a man with your experience in the neighborhood. Must give everyone a sense of security." The polite, almost deferential response felt like mockery to Harlan. He couldn't tell if he was being genuinely complimented or subtly ridiculed, and the ambiguity exasperated him. He had come to intimidate, to put this newcomer in his place, but he felt like he was punching smoke. Darius was a vault of calm, and Harlan's psychological weapons bounced harmlessly off the walls. Frustrated, Harlan played his final card, a direct, probing question designed to be an insult. "So what do you do, Darius, if you don't mind me asking? To afford a place like this, a car like that, you must have a pretty interesting job." The implication hung in the air, dense and unpleasant. Your money can't be legitimate. Darius finally smiled, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and infinitely more powerful. He looked Harlan straight in the eyes with now undeniable amusement. "I work for the government," he said, and the simple, honest answer felt both wonderfully inadequate and perfectly sufficient. He offered no further details. He felt no need to justify his existence to this petty, resentful man. The answer completely unnerved Harlan. The government, like the Department of Motor Vehicles or the post office, didn't fit any of the criminal profiles he had constructed. The ambiguity, the lack of a clear box to put Darius in, was the most unsettling thing of all. "The government," Harlan repeated, drawing the words out. "Right. Well, like I said, welcome to the neighborhood." The words were clipped, stripped of their earlier false bonhomie. He turned without another word and strode back across the street, his face clouded with frustration. Darius watched him go as the smile faded from his lips. He looked down at the gleaming red hood of the McLaren and then back at the sterile, perfect facade of Harlan Pike's house. He had been welcomed. It was a declaration of war disguised as a friendly greeting, and Darius understood with the weary certainty of a lifetime of similar encounters that this was only the beginning. The bully had taken the first step. The game was afoot. Harlan Pike's failure to intimidate Darius Voss during their welcome chat did not deter him. It galvanized him. The calm, polite, unshakable composure of his new neighbor was not the mark of a respectable gentleman, but the silent arrogance of a man who believed himself above the rules. To Harlan, Darius's composure was a challenge, a quiet declaration that he would not be intimidated. Harlan, a man whose authority was rarely questioned, at least not to his face, could not allow that. If psychological tactics didn't work, he would escalate. He would use the most powerful tool at his disposal, the authority of his badge and the intimidating presence of his patrol car. The war for Serenity Creek would now be fought with the official resources of the city police department. The harassment began the following day. Harlan had switched his shift to the evening rotation, giving him a legitimate reason to patrol the quiet suburban streets at dusk. Exactly as Darius sat in his home office, a magnificent room with a large window facing the street, a blinding light suddenly erased the darkness. He looked up, startled, and saw Harlan's patrol car parked directly in front. Its powerful roof-mounted spotlight was aimed straight at his window. It was a blinding, invasive beam that turned his private space into a public spectacle. The light remained fixed on the window for a full minute, an eternity in the silent darkness, before it finally switched off. The patrol car didn't move. It stayed there for another half hour, an imposing silent sentinel in the dark, a clear and unambiguous message. "I'm watching you. I can put you under a spotlight whenever I want." The next day, the tactic became more agile. Darius had to leave for a meeting in the city. As he pulled the McLaren out of the driveway, he saw Harlan's patrol car parked at the end of the cul-de-sac. The moment Darius turned onto the main road, the patrol car followed. Harlan tailed him for 3 kilometers, maintaining the perfect legal distance. He never turned on his lights. He never tried to pull him over. He simply stayed there, a constant, threatening presence in the rearview mirror. It was a classic intimidation tactic designed to unnerve, to make the target feel hunted. Darius knew exactly what this was. He also knew that any ordinary citizen, seeing a police car follow them for that long, would grow nervous. Maybe even make a small traffic mistake out of nerves, giving the officer a pretext to stop him. Darius, however, drove impeccably. He used his turn signals, respected the speed limit, and took every curve with precision. After 3 kilometers, Harlan, with no reason to stop, abruptly turned and disappeared. The message, however, had been delivered. I own these roads. I can follow you. I can disrupt your life at will. The campaign was a torrent of petty official harassment. Harlan made sure to drive slowly past Darius's house several times during his shift. Sometimes he parked down the street and just sat there. The red and blue light bar on his car, a constant silent threat. He ran Darius's license plate, a plate he already knew was clean, again and again, hoping to find some flaw, a suspended registration, anything. Every time the computer returned the same result, registered to Darius A. Voss. No warrants, no infractions. One afternoon, a courier delivered a package to Darius's house, a set of architectural plans for the new landscaping. The courier briefly double-parked his van while carrying the package to the door. From his window, Harlan saw his opportunity. He was off duty, but his zeal for enforcing the law was not. He stormed out of his house, heading straight for the bewildered driver. "You can't park here," Harlan barked, in a voice full of authority he did not officially possess at that moment. "This is a residential street. You're blocking traffic." "Sir, it'll only take 30 seconds, the courier said, lifting the package. "I don't care if it takes 3 seconds. I'm a police officer. Now move this vehicle or I'll call it in. I'll write you a ticket and have you towed." Darius, hearing the commotion, opened his front door. "Is there a problem, Officer Pike?" he asked in a calm voice that contrasted sharply with Harlan's aggressive diatribe. Harlan spun around, startled. "The problem is this van is illegally parked. This is not a loading zone for any commercial business," he snapped. "He's delivering a personal package to my house," Darius said calmly. "And you're off duty. You have no authority to direct traffic or threaten citizens." The direct challenge to his authority, especially in front of a third party, sent a surge of fury through Harlan. His face flushed deep red. "I'm always a law enforcement officer," he spat, "and I'm telling you this is a violation." Darius simply looked at him, then at the courier. "Please deliver my package," he said to the driver in a quiet voice. The courier, looking first at the furious off-duty officer and then at the homeowner, who seemed impossibly calm, made a quick decision. He hurried up the porch, handed the package to Darius, got a quick signature, and practically ran back to his van, driving off without looking back. Harlan stood in the middle of the street, furious and powerless. He had been publicly overruled, his authority treated as irrelevant. He glared at Darius, who simply gave him another of those small, exasperatingly calm smiles, then turned and went back inside, closing the door behind him. The pattern was established. Harlan would use his power, both official and apparent, as a weapon. And Darius would respond to that aggression not with fear or anger, but with a quiet, unbreakable adherence to the law, a realm in which, unknown to Harlan, he was a far more powerful player. Harlan believed he was undermining Darius's peace. In reality, he was only building the case against himself. In the cool, quiet sanctuary of his home, far from the prying eyes of his hostile neighbor, Darius Voss was not cowering. He was not nervous. He was working. Officer Harlan Pike's campaign of harassment was not just a nuisance. It was a series of illegal acts, and Darius treated it as such. By nature and by profession, he was a man who built cases. He dealt in facts, evidence, and patterns, and Harlan Pike was providing him with a classic example of all three. In his home office, a room of clean lines, dark wood, and integrated technology, Darius opened a secure encrypted file on his laptop. The file was labeled simply Pike H. Inside, he had created a meticulous log. With the dispassionate precision of an experienced analyst, he documented every incident. Entry 1. The spotlight incident. He noted the exact time. He recorded the duration of the light on his window, 60 seconds. He even noted the position of the patrol car. He had also saved the video. His home security system was a top-of-the-line package that was part of the house's smart technology installation. It wasn't a consumer system from a big-box store. It consisted of multiple 4K cameras with low-light capability. Their feeds recorded and stored on a secure local server. The video of the patrol car's spotlight cutting through the darkness was crystal clear. Entry 2. Vehicular surveillance. He recorded the date and time of the tail, noted the make, model, and number of the patrol car he had easily memorized. He detailed the route, the duration of the surveillance, approximately 3.2 kilometers, and the lack of any legal justification for the action. He even noted the traffic conditions. Light. No other vehicles between them for much of the time. This was not a police officer who happened to end up behind him by chance. It was deliberate. Third entry. Harassment of a courier. He recorded the entire incident with the delivery driver. He noted that Harlan was off duty, not in uniform, and had identified himself as a police officer to intimidate a civilian. He included the name of the courier company and the time of delivery. He could obtain a statement from the driver if necessary. The audio captured by the discreet microphone built into his doorbell camera was perfect. Harlan's aggressive, threatening tone was undeniable. Darius understood the psychology of a man like Harlan Pike. Bullies of his type craved a reaction. They wanted fear, anger, a loud confrontation they could then use to justify their own escalation. They wanted their target to scream, curse, make a mistake that would give them a reason to slap on the cuffs and drag him away. Darius would give him nothing. His serenity was not just his nature, it was a strategy. Every time Harlan pushed, Darius simply held firm, stayed within the law. His calm reflected the other man's irrational, ugly rage right back at him. He knew this was a classic case of deprivation of rights under color of law, a violation of Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. It was a federal crime, the kind of crime he had built his career prosecuting. He had sent men to prison for far less. Harlan Pike, in his petty racist campaign, was unwittingly building a federal case against himself. And Darius was simply there to take notes. His patience was his greatest weapon, a tool he had perfected while dismantling criminal organizations, corrupt politicians, and violent offenders. He knew how to wait, to let his target make mistake after mistake, weaving the rope that would eventually hang them. One evening, he sat in his backyard, a beautiful space overlooking a serene wooded area. He had a glass of wine and a book, but he wasn't reading. He was thinking. He had hoped this move would be a fresh start, a place of peace where he could decompress from the immense pressures of his job, a place where he could simply be Darius, not Assistant United States Attorney Voss. But the world, it seemed, had followed him here in the form of a bitter uniformed man across the street. A slight, sad smile touched his lips. He had dealt with men who ran international drug cartels, men who ordered hits on witnesses, men who laundered billions of dollars. They were powerful, dangerous, and cunning. And yet in some ways, Harlan Pike was a more insidious poison. He was the everyday, mundane face of a deeper social rot. The cartel boss knew he was a criminal. Harlan Pike believed he was a hero. He believed his prejudices were patriotism, his harassment a form of justice. Darius took a sip of wine. He would not be driven out. He would not be intimidated. He had earned his place in this house, in this neighborhood, and he would defend it. He would let Harlan continue his pathetic little war. He would let him feel powerful, let him believe he was winning. And in the meantime, the file would grow, the evidence would accumulate, and the silent, patient prosecutor would build his case piece by incriminating piece. The trap was set, and the bait was Harlan Pike's self-destructive intolerance. The perfect pretext, the one Harlan Pike had been desperately searching for, did not come in the roar of an engine or the thumping bass of a rap song, but in the soaring, intricate notes of a 300-year-old violin concerto. It was a radiant, sunny afternoon. The windows of Serenity Creek were open to the warm, gentle breeze. From Darius Voss's house, the music began to drift out. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was Vivaldi's Four Seasons, played through a high-fidelity sound system that reproduced every note with stunning clarity. The music was elegant, complex, and beautiful, a sound that should have enhanced the tranquility of the afternoon. To Harlan Pike, it was the screech of a car alarm. He was in his backyard, struggling unsuccessfully to assemble a new gas grill, his frustration rising with every incomprehensible instruction in the manual. The music filtering over the fence from Darius's patio was an assault on his senses. It wasn't the genre that bothered him. He barely registered what it was. It was the quality. The sound was too rich, too clear, too expensive. It was another ostentatious display of wealth, another reminder of the gulf between his life and Darius's. In his twisted logic, it was a deliberate provocation. He saw it as Darius rubbing his superiority in everyone's face, flaunting his refined tastes to a neighborhood of simple, hard-working people. "Can you believe this guy?" Harlan exploded to Sylvia, who was sitting on the patio reading a magazine. "He thinks he lives in a concert hall. This is a neighborhood, not the goddamn opera." Sylvia looked up, frowning. "It is a little loud, honey," she said, always ready to validate his complaints. "And it's weird music. Not normal." That was all the encouragement Harlan needed. Normal was the key word. This music, like the car and the silk shirts, was not normal. It was foreign. It was a violation of the unwritten code of suburban mediocrity. He threw the wrench onto the grass, his face a mask of righteous indignation. Finally, he had a legitimate complaint. The noise ordinance. It was his panacea. He went inside and headed straight to his study, where he kept a copy of the Serenity Creek Homeowners Association bylaws and the city's municipal codes. He found the section on noise. No resident shall make or permit any excessive or unreasonably loud noise that is clearly audible at a distance of 50 feet from the property line. His heart pounded with excitement. Darius's house was less than 50 feet away. The music was clearly audible. It was a clear violation. He, Harlan Pike, was not being a prejudiced harasser. He was being a diligent citizen and a law enforcement officer, upholding the standards of his community. He didn't call the police emergency line. He didn't file a complaint with the Homeowners Association. That was for civilians. He was the law. He would handle this himself. He put on his game face, the stern, intimidating expression he used during traffic stops, and walked out of his house and across the street. He didn't walk up the path to the front door. He cut straight across the lawn, a deliberate act of trespass, and headed for the backyard where the music was coming from. Darius was on his patio, sitting in a comfortable armchair with a laptop open. The Vivaldi concerto played at a pleasant volume for him, but as Harlan had correctly calculated, it was audible to the neighbors. He looked up as Harlan's shadow fell over him, a mild expression of surprise on his face. "Officer Pike," Darius said in a serene voice. "Can I help you with something?" You can turn off this damn noise, Harlan barked, abandoning any pretense of neighborly courtesy. This is a residential neighborhood. We don't want this noise polluting the whole block. Darius raised his eyebrows slightly. Noise? It's Vivaldi, and the volume isn't excessive. I don't care if it's Beethoven or the Beatles, Harlan snapped, raising his voice. It's a violation of the Municipal Noise Ordinance. Article 9, Paragraph 4. I can hear it clearly from my property, which is all I need. I'm warning you, Voss. Turn it off, now. Darius looked at Harlan with a long, scrutinizing gaze. He saw the manufactured rage, the desperate need for confrontation. He understood that this had nothing to do with the music. The music was just an excuse, a tool for Harlan to assert his dominance. Darius could have argued. He could have pointed out that the volume was perfectly reasonable for a Saturday afternoon. He could have told Harlan to get off his property. Instead, he did something far more disarming. He reached for the small wireless remote on the table beside him, and with a single touch, turned the music off. The sudden silence was deeper than the volume of the music had been. "Is that better, Harlan?" Darius asked, his voice still calm. The immediate, unconditional obedience was a victory for Harlan. He had given an order, and the man he hated had obeyed. A triumphant, petulant smile spread across his face. "Yeah, it is," he said. "See that it stays that way. People around here value their peace." He stood there a moment longer, savoring his victory, waiting for Darius to look cowed, defeated. But Darius simply looked at him with that same unsettling, unreadable expression. There was no anger, no fear, no submission, only serene, patient observation. Harlan, feeling his victory sour in the face of that unshakable calm, spun on his heel. "Just remember what I said," he called over his shoulder as he strode across the lawn. In his mind, he was a conquering hero. He had confronted the intruder and won. He had silenced the offensive music. He believed he had finally put Darius Voss in his place. He was completely unaware that his entire performance, his trespass, his belligerent tone, his baseless demand, had been perfectly recorded by a new security camera Darius had installed that very morning, discreetly mounted under the eave overlooking the patio. The prosecutor's file had a new, compelling entry. Harlan's victory over the Vivaldi incident was a potent drug. For the rest of the weekend, he felt a renewed sense of power and control. He had confronted the intruder, enforced the rules, and obtained obedience. In his mind, the hierarchy had been restored. He was the alpha, and Darius Voss had been put in his place. Yet this new confidence was built on a dangerously flawed interpretation of events. He mistook Darius's strategic de-escalation for submission and his patience for weakness. This miscalculation would lead him to his final catastrophic error. The conflict that had been simmering for weeks was about to explode. The flashpoint came a few days later. It was a clear afternoon, and Darius decided it was the perfect day to take the McLaren out for a drive and let the powerful engine breathe on the rural roads outside the city. He spent half an hour in his garage preparing the car, the dihedral doors open like invitations. While he worked, he decided to listen to music. Learning from his earlier encounter with Harlan, he didn't use the patio speakers. Instead, he used a small, high-quality portable speaker placed on a workbench inside the garage. The volume was kept at a moderate level. He was listening to a playlist of classic jazz, Miles Davis, John Coltrane. The sound was sophisticated, melodic, and barely audible from the street. But Harlan Pike, who had just arrived home after his shift, heard it, or rather, sensed it. He saw the open garage, the crimson car, and the figure of Darius moving inside. That was enough for him. any music coming from that house was a challenge, a personal insult. He interpreted it as a deliberate test of the boundaries he had set. His face hardened. The brief sense of triumph from the weekend evaporated, replaced by a fresh surge of rage. He was tired of warnings. He was tired of veiled threats. It was time for a final, clear demonstration of dominance. He didn't bother changing out of his uniform. In fact, he left it on deliberately. The blue fabric and the gleaming badge were a suit of authority he intended to use to full effect. He crossed the street with purposeful strides, his heavy police boots echoing on the pavement, one hand resting casually on the butt of his service weapon in its holster. Darius saw him coming. He straightened after wiping down the dashboard and turned to face his neighbor with a neutral expression. He turned off the music with a remote he pulled from his pocket before Harlan could even open his mouth. "Is there a problem, officer?" Darius asked. His use of the formal title was a subtle acknowledgement of the uniform and the aggression it represented. "You know damn well what the problem is," Harlan roared, his voice echoing in the garage. He pointed a thick, trembling finger at Darius. "I warned you about the noise. I told you this is a quiet neighborhood. What part of that don't you understand, Voss? Are you stupid, or do you just think the rules don't apply to you?" "The music was playing in my garage at a low volume," Darius stated, his voice low and steady, a counterpoint to Harlan's furious shouting. "It was not in any way a violation of any ordinance. You are on my property, and you are harassing me." The direct factual rebuttal was like pouring gasoline on a fire. The word harassing touched a raw nerve. It was an accusation, and it flipped the script. Harlan was the one who did the accusing. He was not the one to be accused. "Harassing you?" Harlan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Buddy, you have no idea what harassment is, but you're about to learn. People like you come in here with your flashy cars paid for, with God knows what dirty money, and think you own the place, think you can do whatever you want." He took another step forward, invading Darius's personal space, trying to use his physical size to intimidate him. Darius didn't move an inch. He stood firm, a pillar of unshakable calm. "This is my town," Harlan spat, his face inches from Darius's. "I've been keeping the peace here for 15 years. We have a certain kind of community, a certain standard. We don't have tuned-up cars. We don't have jungle music blasting all day. And we don't have thugs trying to intimidate decent people." There it was. The poison was out. The coded language of noise and rules fell away, revealing the raw, overt racism that had been hiding underneath. The confrontation was no longer about an alleged disturbance. It was about Harlan's visceral hatred of a black man whose success he could neither comprehend nor tolerate. Darius's expression remained calm and unreadable, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. He was no longer simply documenting a crime. He was enduring a direct, hate-filled verbal assault. He met Harlan's furious glare with a look of deep, almost clinical contempt. "You're a sad, pathetic man, Harlan," Darius said, lowering his voice to a low, quiet tone that somehow carried more power than a shout. "Your badge doesn't make you a king. It makes you a public servant. A servant you're failing miserably. Now I'm telling you for the last time. Get off my property." The compassion, the dismissal, the quiet order. It was the final insult. Harlan, who considered himself the powerful guardian of his community, could not stand being looked down on by this man. All the envy, all the resentment, all the racist bile that had been festering inside him for weeks erupted in a torrent of pure, uncontrolled rage. "Don't you ever talk to me like that!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "I'll show you who's in charge. I'll show you what we do with trash like you and your ridiculous toy car." His hand, which had been resting on his weapon, moved, but not toward the gun. It went to the other side of his duty belt, and his fingers closed around the cold, hard rubber of his collapsible baton. The mask of civility was gone. The unmasking was complete. The police officer had disappeared, replaced by a common thug about to commit a crime. The afternoon sun glinted off the polished chrome buckle of Harlan Pike's duty belt as his hand closed around the baton. The quiet hum of suburban life, a distant lawnmower, the laughter of children playing 2 streets over, seemed to fade into an expectant silence. This was a decisive moment, a precipice. Darius Voss stood firm, his body calm but not aggressive, his gaze cold and watchful. He saw the flash in Harlan's eyes the instant the last shred of the officer's professional self-control burned away. Consumed by the fire of his personal hatred, with a flick of his wrist, Harlan extended the collapsible baton. The 3 segments snapped open with a sharp metallic click, a sound of imminent violence that echoed through the immaculate garage. It was a clear and unequivocal escalation from verbal aggression to the threat of physical force. "You think this car makes you a big man?" Harlan growled in a deep, guttural voice. He was no longer shouting. The rage had concentrated, condensed into a cold, threatening point. "You think you can come into my world and disrespect me? This isn't your world. This is a symbol of everything that's wrong. It's filth." He was no longer talking only about the car. The McLaren, in its gleaming crimson perfection, had become the physical embodiment of Darius himself. His success, his confidence, his very presence. Destroying one was destroying the other. Darius said nothing. He simply watched, his mind a whirlwind of cold legal calculations. Assault with a deadly weapon. Brandishing. The value of the property elevates the next act to a felony. The uniform makes it a federal crime under color of law. He was no longer a harassed homeowner. He was a prosecutor watching a suspect seal his own fate. His silence, his complete lack of fear, was the final trigger. Harlan had expected him to flinch, to beg, to show panic. This quiet, dignified defiance was intolerable. It was the ultimate proof of Darius's arrogance. "I'm going to teach you some respect," Harlan hissed. He turned with jerky, adrenaline-fueled movements and swung the baton. It wasn't a wild or clumsy blow. It was a practiced, deliberate strike of the kind he had been trained to use to break windows or subdue suspects. The hardened steel tip of the baton slammed into the carbon fiber hood of the McLaren. A metallic clang. The sound was obscene in the quiet afternoon. It was a sound of violation, a repulsive crunch of metal against composite material. A deep, ugly gash appeared in the perfect, polished red surface, an irregular scar of raw fiber exposed. Harlan was panting, his chest heaving. He had crossed the line. He had done the unthinkable, attacked a man's property right in front of him. But the surge of power was intoxicating. He felt a wave of triumphant release. At last, he had made his mark. He had physically imposed his will on this man's perfect, ordered world. He turned toward Darius with a deranged smile on his face, expecting to see his victim finally break. He saw nothing of the sort. Darius did not flinch. His expression remained one of glacial calm, but his eyes now held a definitive look of deep, absolute condemnation. It was the look a judge gives before pronouncing sentence. The lack of a satisfying reaction only fanned Harlan's fury. One blow was not enough. He had to break it. He had to break him. "This is a quiet neighborhood for decent, hardworking families," he sneered, repeating the words that were the essence of his twisted mantra. "We don't need people like you with your loud music and your noisy toys trying to turn it into a ghetto." He raised the baton again, this time aiming higher. Crack! The baton struck the elegantly curved windshield. A spiderweb of fractures instantly spread from the point of impact, destroying the perfect view of the handcrafted leather interior. The beautiful futuristic machine was now wrecked, covered in scars. Harlan stood there breathing hard, the baton held carelessly at his side. He had done it. He had asserted his dominance in the most primitive way possible. The silence that followed was broken only by his own ragged breathing and the faint musical tinkle of a small piece of safety glass falling onto the car's dashboard. "My lawyer will be in touch," Harlan spat, a final, pathetic attempt to frame his criminal act as some kind of official procedure. It was the desperate, instinctive threat of a man who on some level knew he had gone too far, but was too deep in the rage to back down. He turned and walked out of the garage without looking back, his heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline, triumph, and the first glimmers of fear. He had won the battle, he told himself. He had shown Darius Voss who was really in charge of Serenity Creek. Darius remained motionless for a long time after Harlan left. He looked at the gash in the hood of his car. He looked at the shattered windshield. He didn't just see the damage, which would cost tens of thousands of dollars to repair. He saw the physical manifestation of a deep, ugly hatred. This was no longer a simple neighborhood dispute. This was a hate crime, an assault, a felony. Slowly and deliberately, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He did not dial 911. The local police, the institution Harlan Pike represented, was not the solution. It was the problem. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a single entry, a man with more weight in the world of law enforcement than Harlan Pike could possibly comprehend. He had taken the bait. The trap had sprung. And Harlan Pike, in his racist rage, had just destroyed not only a piece of property, but his own career, his freedom, and his entire life. He had assaulted a federal prosecutor and had no idea that the full weight of the United States government was about to come down on him. Darius watched the formless figure of Harlan Pike retreat across the street. The man's stride was filled with a false, arrogant bravado. He saw the front door of the smaller colonial house slam shut. The sound was a punctuation mark on the act of violence. The peace of the afternoon returned, filling the void left by the shouting and the destruction. The tinkle of the broken windshield seemed to echo in the sudden stillness. With a chilling, almost inhuman serenity, Darius examined the damage. He observed the deep cut in the hood and the spiderweb of cracks in the glass. He absorbed the reality of the violation not with emotion, but with cold, analytical focus. This was now a crime scene, and he was the primary witness. He took his phone and with a steady hand began documenting the fact. He took several high-resolution photos of the damage from multiple angles, capturing how the light hit the fractured glass and the splintered fibers of the carbon fiber hood. Then he activated the video recorder and slowly, deliberately walked around the car, narrating in a low, even voice. Approximately 2:45 in the afternoon. The location is my personal garage. The perpetrator, Officer Harlan Pike of the City Police Department, has just left the scene after committing an act of vandalism and assault. His voice was that of a man dictating an official report. No anger, no distress. This was not the recording of a victim. It was the collection of evidence. He returned to his house, closing the garage door behind him with a soft, final sound. The click of the lock sealed him inside his fortress. He did not pace the floors. He did not pour himself a strong drink. He went straight to his home office. He sat behind his large, orderly desk and uploaded the photos and video to the secure Pike H file on his server. Then he opened the feed from his garage security camera, another new addition that had captured the entire incident in crisp 4K video and audio. He watched the event unfold, like a silent observer of his own confrontation. He heard every insult, every threat. He saw the baton snap open. He witnessed the two violent, deliberate blows. He saved a copy of the video, labeling it Pike Assault. Only then, with all the digital evidence secured, cataloged, and backed up, did he allow himself a moment. He leaned back in his leather chair, closed his eyes, and took one deep breath. He let the rage he had so masterfully contained wash over him. It was not a burning, chaotic fury. It was a cold, pure, righteous anger. The anger of a man who had dedicated his life to upholding the law, only to have one of its supposed guardians pervert it so grotesquely. The anger of a citizen who had been stalked, harassed, and attacked in his own home simply because of the color of his skin and the magnitude of his success. After exactly 60 seconds of controlled, silent fury, he opened his eyes. The fire had been extinguished, concentrated, and converted into focused legal energy. He picked up a second phone from his desk, a sleek encrypted device from the Department of Justice, and pressed a speed dial button. The call connected almost instantly, without ringing. "Henderson," answered a sharp, professional voice. "Agent Crow, this is Darius Voss," he said in a calm, serene voice. "Mr. Voss, it's an honor, sir," the voice replied, a note of deference immediately present. "Is everything all right? You're using the direct line." Agent Elias Crow was the special agent in charge of the regional FBI office. "I'm fine, Elias, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention," Darius said. "Talk to me." "An active duty officer from the local precinct just committed a serious hate crime against me on my property." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. For 5 seconds, the only sound was the faint, secure hiss of the encrypted connection. The head of the FBI was processing the fact that a local police officer had just attacked one of the most respected federal prosecutors in the country. "Define hate crime, Darius," Crow said finally, his voice now dangerously low, stripped of all bureaucratic formality. It was the voice of a hunter. "It started with a racially charged trespass. Then he used his police baton to smash the windshield and hood of my vehicle. The entire incident is on video. His name is Officer Harlan Pike. Are you injured? Do you need protection? I'm secure at home, but Elias, this was not an isolated incident. For the past 2 weeks, he has engaged in a pattern of harassment and intimidation using his patrol car and his official position. I have documented everything." Another pause, this one shorter, more threatening. "A pattern," Crow repeated. "That shows intent. This isn't just vandalism, Darius. This is a conspiracy to deprive you of your civil rights under color of law. We've got him." "What's the protocol, Elias?" Darius asked, knowing the answer, but needing to set the process in motion. "The protocol is that we dismantle him and anyone who enabled him," Crow said, as raw institutional fury finally broke through his control. He took a deep breath and shifted back into operational mode. "All right, listen to me. Under no circumstances call the local police. We have to leave them room to obstruct if they choose to. That will become part of a larger case. My surveillance and high-level tactical teams are being activated right now. We are opening a full federal investigation effective immediately. Your house is now the center of a federal operation. Understood?" "Understood," Darius confirmed. "Stay inside. Do not engage. Do not open the door unless it's my people, and they will have a code word. Vindicator. I'm on my way to the command center. By nightfall, we will have a complete physical and digital perimeter around your house. We will own his digital life, Darius. Every email, every text, every keystroke, he has no idea what he just did." "I know," Darius said quietly. "I'm sorry this happened to you, my friend," Crow said with a fierce protective promise. "Just do your job, Elias," Darius replied. He ended the call. The storm had been unleashed. The call, which had lasted less than 3 minutes, had activated the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country. Harlan Pike, in his ignorant rage, believed he had won a neighborhood skirmish. He had no idea he had just declared war on the United States Department of Justice. Darius leaned back in his chair. The waiting had begun. Across the street, in the beige and gray sanctuary of the Pike House, the atmosphere was one of triumphant adrenaline release. Harlan Pike burst through his front door, face flushed, heart pounding. Sylvia rushed to meet him, her face twisted with anxiety and excitement. "What happened? I heard you yelling," she exclaimed. Harlan was breathing hard, a wild, frantic smile spreading across his face. "I handled it," he said, tossing his baton onto the entryway table with a metallic clatter. "I finally handled it. He won't be bothering us with his noise anymore." He told her the story, and with every retelling, he grew prouder. He presented himself as the hero who had finally confronted the arrogant interloper. He described the confrontation, exaggerating Darius's defiance, and then described the act of vandalism, framing it not as a criminal act, but as a justified act of law enforcement. "And then he had the nerve to tell me to get off his property," Harlan spat, pacing the living room. "His property. So I showed him what I thought of his property. I took my baton, and I wrecked that ridiculous, stupid car of his. You should have seen his face, Sylv. He just stood there, frozen. Didn't know what hit him." A small, rational part of Sylvia knew this was incredibly dangerous. Vandalizing property, especially for a police officer, was a serious crime. But that small voice was drowned out by the stronger, more satisfying sense of victory. Her husband had enforced the boundaries of their world. The black man had been taught a lesson. She felt a vicarious thrill, a surge of pride in her husband's dominance. "I'm glad for you, honey," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He had it coming. People like that only understand one thing. You have to show them you're not afraid." "Exactly," Harlan said, beaming. He felt powerful, vindicated. He had protected his neighborhood, his family, his values. And you know what's the best part? He won't do anything. Who's he going to call? The police? I am the police. Any complaint he files will end up on my captain's desk, and Captain Grayson will laugh at it and throw it in the trash. We take care of our own." He chuckled, imagining the scene. It was a well-worn path in his precinct. They sat in the living room, basking in the glow of their apparent victory. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows, illuminating the dancing dust motes. It was a perfect, quiet suburban afternoon, made even more perfect by the successful repulsion of an unwanted element. As the hours passed, their confidence grew. They watched Darius's house from the window. There were no visitors. No patrol cars entered the cul-de-sac, except the one Harlan had just parked in his own driveway. The silence from across the street was, to them, concrete proof of Darius's fear and helplessness. "See?" Harlan said at dinner as he carved a steak. "Nothing. He's terrified. He knows he can't win. We won, Sylv. We showed him Serenity Creek is not a ghetto." "Of course we did," Sylvia said, raising her wine glass. "Maybe now he'll finally get the message and sell that house. Go back where people like him belong." Their arrogance was a fortress built on a foundation of prejudice and a lifetime of unearned privilege. They had never faced real consequences for their actions. Harlan's minor infractions at work were always smoothed over by his union representative or by Captain Grayson, who shared his old-school views. Sylvia's social aggressions were always directed at people she considered beneath her, people without the resources or the will to fight back. They operated in a bubble where their power was absolute and their judgment was the law. The idea that Darius might be anything other than a frightened, isolated victim was incomprehensible to them. They were so busy congratulating themselves on their victory that they failed to notice the subtle, almost imperceptible changes happening around them. They did not see the nondescript florist's van, parked 3 blocks away, with its roof bristling with a sophisticated array of microwave and cellular antennas. They did not notice the sudden momentary flicker in their Wi-Fi signal when a remote FBI cyber team silently breached their network and installed monitoring software. And they completely overlooked the nearly invisible drone, no larger than a hummingbird, that had taken off from that van and now hovered silently 15 meters above their roof. Its high-resolution thermal camera mapped the heat signatures inside their house. Its directional microphone listened to the sound waves vibrating against the glass of their windows. The Pikes believed they were safe in their castle, celebrating a successful siege. In fact, they were subjects in a terrarium, performing for an audience they could not see. Their boasting, their conspiracies, every word they spoke was being captured, analyzed, and logged as evidence for a federal hate crime investigation. Their victory was an illusion, and their arrogance was the noose they were cheerfully tying around their own necks. Justice was not sleeping. It was simply gathering strength, and the silence from across the street was not the silence of fear, but the serene, patient silence of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Inside Darius Voss's quiet house, the living room had been transformed into a temporary command center. The massive 85-inch television that usually displayed a rotating collection of modern art now showed a 6-way split-screen view of the Pike house and its surroundings. The images were sharp, transmitted directly from the resources special agent in charge Elias Crow's team had deployed with astonishing efficiency. One screen showed a high-altitude thermal view from the drone. 2 heat signatures, one male, one female, were clearly visible, moving through the ground floor of the house across the street. A second camera, a pinhole lens expertly mounted by a covert entry team on a utility pole, offered a crisp, direct view of the Pikes' backyard and dining room window. A third and fourth image showed the live perspectives of 2 undercover agents sitting in cars parked at either end of the cul-de-sac. The final 2 screens displayed not video, but cascading lines of data, a real-time capture of all wireless and cellular traffic coming from the Pike residence. Agent Crow's face appeared in a small, secure video window in the corner of the screen. He was in the FBI's mobile command van, a headset around his neck. His expression was grim, a mask of cold fury. "Thermal shows they're in the dining room celebrating," Crow said, his voice a low growl in Darius's ear. "Audio is live. The laser microphone aimed at the dining room window is getting a clear signal. Let's hear what's making our model citizens so happy." An analyst in the van patched in the audio. The voices of Harlan and Sylvia Pike filled Darius's living room, unfiltered, ugly, and damningly clear. "And I told him, this is my town." Harlan's voice overflowed with satisfaction. "You should have seen him, Sylv. He just stood there, speechless. He finally knows who's in charge." "I'm so proud of you, Harlan," Sylvia's voice replied with a little squeal. "He needed to be taken down a peg. What do you think he'll do now?" "Nothing," Harlan scoffed. "He'll call the station tomorrow and file a vandalism report. It'll go to Captain Grayson. I'll call Fran first thing in the morning and give him a heads up. He'll bury it so deep it'll never see the light of day. He might even lose the paperwork on purpose. That's what we do. We protect our own." Darius listened with an impassive face. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a documentary about 2 particularly vicious predators that had just walked into a hunter's elaborate trap. "He's admitting conspiracy to obstruct justice and file a false police report," Darius stated flatly over the speakerphone. "Add it to the indictment." "It's already on the list," Crow confirmed. "Every word they say is another year in a federal penitentiary, They really think they're untouchable. It's the shield of mediocrity, Elias, Darius said, his voice tinged with exhausted sadness. They've only ever harassed people they knew couldn't fight back. They can't conceive of a reality where their actions have consequences. They're about to get a very abrupt lesson. Speaking of which, Crow said, our cyber team is in. We're pulling everything. Finances, emails, social media, text messages. Men like Pike, cops who abuse their power. It's never just one thing. It's a pattern. It's a deep rot. A new window appeared on Darius's screen, showing spreadsheets and bank statements. And there it is, Crow said, with grim satisfaction in his tone. Looks like the Pikes have a habit of forgetting to log cash evidence from drug seizures. There are multiple discrepancies between their reports and the amounts recorded in the evidence room. And Mrs. Pike has been using a GPS tracking device on her husband's patrol car. Looks like our happy couple has trust issues. This is more than I imagined, Darius said, feeling a chill despite the warmth of his home. It wasn't just racism. It was a deep, profound, spiritual corruption. Hate is never an isolated emotion, Crow said. It's a symptom of a larger disease. Greed, insecurity, a desperate need for control. It's all there. They're not just criminals, Darius. They're cliches. He paused and softened his tone. I'm sorry you had to be the target of this, my friend. When you told me you were buying this house, I checked out the neighborhood. It was supposed to be safe. Quiet. It's not your fault, Elias, Darius said firmly. You can't predict this kind of poison, but you can remove it, and that's exactly what we're doing. He looked back at the screen where the thermal signatures of the Pikes had settled in their living room, in front of the flickering blue light of a television. They looked so normal, so mundane. Two people in a house watching television on a weekday evening. But the invisible gaze of justice was watching them, peeling back their secrets layer by layer. The house was no longer just a house. It was a glass cage, and the two creatures living in it had no idea they were being studied, every movement documented, while the net of federal power closed silently around them. Their comfortable home had become their tomb, and their triumphant celebration was their own wake. The following morning, following the precise legal strategy drawn up by Darius and Agent Crow, a crucial move was made in the chess game. It was a move designed not to succeed, but to fail in a very specific and documented way. The purpose was to officially test the blue wall of silence that Harlan Pike was counting on to protect him. At exactly 10 o'clock, a lawyer from a prestigious downtown firm, hired by Darius for this specific task, walked into the city police station. The lawyer, a sharp, serene woman named Ms. Langford, was there to file a formal complaint on behalf of her client, Darius Voss. The station was a gloomy utilitarian building that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Ms. Langford, dressed in a tailored dark gray suit that radiated calm authority, approached the reception desk where a bored-looking sergeant was checking his phone. "Good morning, Sergeant," she began in a crisp, professional voice. "I'm here on behalf of my client, Mr. Darius Voss." The desk sergeant's head snapped up. Mentioning a particular officer's name, especially a sergeant's, changed the dynamic immediately. "Harding wants to report Dale Harding?" he asked with a mixture of disbelief and reflexive hostility. "Correct," Ms. Langford answered with an unreadable expression. "The complaint includes felony vandalism, assault with a deadly weapon, and a pattern of targeted harassment." The sergeant stared at her for a long moment, then sighed and picked up the phone. "Cap," he growled into the receiver. "Got a lawyer here. Wants to file on Harding. Yeah, a nasty one." He listened for a moment, eyes fixed on Ms. Langford. "Yeah, okay." He hung up and pointed down a gloomy hallway. "Captain Grayson wants to see you. Office at the end of the hall on the right." Captain Wade Grayson's office was a small, cluttered space dominated by a large metal desk and a wall covered with plaques and yellowing photographs. Grayson was a man in his 50s, with a face like a clenched fist and a belly that strained the buttons of his uniform shirt. He was the epitome of the old-school district captain, a man whose primary loyalty was not to the public he served, but to the men under his command. He had received a call from Harlan Pike an hour earlier, exactly as planned. The story he had been told was about an aggressive new resident causing problems and making threats. "Sit," Grayson said brusquely, without looking up from a report he was pretending to read. Ms. Langford sat, placing her briefcase on her lap. She waited in silence. Finally, Grayson put the report down and looked at her. "Well," he said, leaning back in his creaking chair, "my desk sergeant says you've got a problem with one of my best men, Harlan Pike. My client has a problem with Sergeant Pike's criminal conduct." Ms. Langford corrected him gently. "Yesterday afternoon, Sergeant Pike entered my client's private property and, after a series of racist insults, used his service baton to smash the windshield and hood of his vehicle." Grayson picked up a pen and tapped it against his desk. "That's a very serious accusation, Counselor. Do you have any evidence?" "We have a high-definition video recording of the entire incident that I am prepared to submit as evidence," she said, her hand resting on her briefcase. "The video includes clear audio of Sergeant Pike's unprovoked verbal assault and the subsequent destruction of property." Grayson's eyes narrowed slightly. The mention of video was a problem, but not an insurmountable one. Videos could get lost in evidence. Reports could be misfiled. "I see. And what did your client do to provoke this alleged incident?" he asked, falling back on the classic tactic of blaming the victim. "My client was in his own garage listening to music at a reasonable volume," Ms. Langford replied in an icy tone. "Right," Grayson said. He leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from feigned concern to paternalistic condescension. "Look, Counselor, I've known Harlan Pike for 20 years. He's a good cop, a little impulsive sometimes, but his heart's in the right place. This sounds to me like a typical neighborhood dispute that got out of hand. Your client is new to the area, probably doesn't understand how things work around here. My advice is you tell your client to go home, calm down, and try to be a better neighbor. Filing a formal complaint like this against a decorated officer is only going to cause him more problems in the long run. We take care of our own." It was a threat delivered with the smug certainty of a man who believed himself completely untouchable. He was publicly admitting his intention to obstruct justice. Ms. Langford stood up. The checkmate was complete. "Thank you for your time, Captain," she said in a voice devoid of all emotion. "You have made the department's position perfectly and unequivocally clear." She turned and walked out of the office, leaving Captain Grayson sitting behind his desk, confident he had successfully quashed yet another inconvenient complaint against one of his boys. He had no idea that Ms. Langford's briefcase contained a state-of-the-art digital recorder that had captured every word of their conversation. He did not know that by admitting his intention to bury the complaint, he had made himself an accomplice in a federal civil rights investigation. He believed he was protecting his district. In reality, he had just signed his own death warrant. The blue wall of silence was not a fortress. It was a house of cards, and the FBI was about to knock it down. Night settled over Serenity Creek Estates, wrapping the quiet cul-de-sac in a mantle of darkness and artificial peace. For Harlan and Sylvia Pike, it was a night of celebration. Captain Grayson had called Harlan after the lawyer's visit, chuckling as he recounted how he had handled the situation. "Don't worry about a thing, Harlan," he had said. "It's over. Consider it ancient history. The system they trusted had worked exactly as designed. It had protected them. They slept the deep. dreamless sleep of the self-righteous, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. Across the street, the lights in Darius Voss's house were also off, but he was not sleeping. He sat in an armchair in his upstairs bedroom, from whose window he had a perfect view of the Pike house. He was calm, like a man waiting for a dawn he knew would change everything. His phone vibrated softly. It was Agent Crow. "All agents are in position," the voice said. "The local U.S. Marshals team is ready for transport. Ready at 6. A few kilometers away, in an anonymous industrial park, the final preparations were underway. Inside a large, unmarked warehouse that served as the FBI's tactical base, the atmosphere was one of quiet concentration. 2 black, armored tactical vans waited with engines idling softly. A team of 14 FBI SWAT agents in body armor and matte black helmets performed final equipment checks. They had studied the floor plans of the Pike house for hours. They knew the layout better than the Pikes did. They had thermal images of the bedroom where the targets were sleeping. At 5:45, they climbed into the vans. The convoy moved out into the pre-dawn darkness like ghosts, their drivers using night vision to navigate. The digital clock on the Pike's nightstand flipped from 5:59 to 6 a.m. At that precise instant, the world as they knew it ceased to exist. The first sound was not a knock, but a deafening explosion. A controlled detonation charge on the front door blew the lock inward with a crash that was more physical concussion than noise. The heavy door, symbol of their suburban security, flew open and slammed against the interior wall. Simultaneously, the large picture window in their living room disintegrated into a million glittering fragments as a flashbang grenade arced through the air and detonated inside. The resulting explosion of light and sound was blinding, deafening, and completely disorienting. "FBI, federal agents, search warrant!" The shouts were a synchronized, terrifying roar coming from a dozen different throats, amplified and inhuman. Harlan Pike jerked awake into a state of pure primal terror. His police instincts screamed that someone had entered his house. He lunged out of bed, groping in the darkness for the pistol he kept on the nightstand. He never found it. Before his fingers could touch the cold steel, the bedroom door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by a battering ram. The doorway filled with a terrifying silhouette, a massive figure in full tactical gear with a ballistic shield in front of him. The eerie green glow of his night vision goggles was otherworldly. A brilliant tactical flashlight mounted on another agent's rifle pinned Harlan against the wall, blinding him. "Hands! Show me your hands now!" the agent shouted. Harlan froze, hands half raised, unable to process the speed and violence of the intrusion. This was not a robbery. This was not the local police. This was federal. Across the bed, Sylvia was screaming, a high, hysterical shriek of pure panic, as 2 more agents flooded the room, weapons trained on her. "On the ground! Face down!" an agent ordered Harlan. A heavy boot kicked the back of his knees, and he collapsed onto the carpet. Within seconds, his hands were yanked behind his back, and the cold, tight bite of plastic flex cuffs dug into his wrists. "What is this? Who are you?" he babbled, face pressed into the floor, the smell of his own fear filling his nostrils. "FBI!" the agent growled in his ear. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." Downstairs, the house was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. The team moved with brutal efficiency, clearing rooms, their shouts of "Clear!" echoing through the house. The Pikes' castle was secured and under federal control in less than 90 seconds. Outside, the cul-de-sac had erupted. Lights came on in every house. Sleepy, confused neighbors peered through their blinds, pale with shock. They saw the armored vans, the heavily armed agents, the shattered facade of the Pike house. They saw Harlan and Sylvia, dressed only in their pajamas. He in underwear and a t-shirt, she in a frilly nightgown, being unceremoniously dragged toward the front door. Sylvia was still screaming, her cries incoherent. "My husband is a police officer. You can't do this. We have rights." "You'll be read your rights in the vehicle, ma'am," an agent said calmly. His voice contrasted sharply with her hysteria. Harlan was silent. His face was a mask of disbelief and growing horror. The cocky, self-assured bully had vanished, replaced by a terrified, confused man in his underwear. As he was shoved toward a black government van, he caught a glimpse of his neighbors' faces in the windows, staring at him with wide, astonished eyes. The humiliation was a physical blow. Then his gaze drifted across the street. In the large picture window of the house opposite, only one light was on. A figure stood there, partially hidden by the shadows, watching the scene. It was Darius Voss. He held a cup of coffee, his expression one of perfect, terrifying calm. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second across the battlefield of their immaculate lawns. And in that instant, Harlan Pike understood the incomprehensible violence, the overwhelming force, the federal agents. Everything snapped into focus in his mind. This was not about drugs. This was not about tax evasion. This was about him. The man he had dismissed, harassed, and assaulted. He had believed Darius was a nobody, a victim he could crush under the heel of his boot. He had made a catastrophic mistake that would annihilate his world. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. This was not a local dispute he could make disappear with a phone call. Somehow, in his arrogant stupidity, he had picked a fight with the gods, and they had just descended from Olympus to drag him to hell. As the car door slammed shut, plunging him into darkness, the only image burned into his mind was the serene, triumphant face of Darius in the window across the street. The hammer had fallen, and his world had shattered. The cold, sterile environment of an FBI field office interrogation room is designed to strip away every trace of power and comfort. There are no windows. The walls are a monotonous gray that absorbs sound. The furniture consists of a single heavy steel table, bolted to the floor, and 3 hard plastic chairs. It is a sensory deprivation chamber, where the only thing that matters is the truth, and the agents who work there are experts at extracting it. Harlan and Sylvia Pike were processed and placed in 2 separate rooms at opposite ends of a long, silent hallway. Their pajamas were taken, and they were given shapeless gray jumpsuits. The entire process was cold, efficient, and absolutely dehumanizing. The last vestiges of their suburban identity were stripped away, leaving them exposed and terrified. Harlan sat alone for what felt like an eternity, the silence pressing down on him. The adrenaline of the raid had long since faded, replaced by a nauseating mixture of fear and confusion. He tried to reconstruct it. The FBI. A full tactical raid. For what? A broken window? It made no sense. He kept coming back to Darius's face in the window, but his mind could not make the leap. Who was he? Finally, the door opened. 2 men in dark suits entered. They were not SWAT agents. They were the investigators. The lead agent, an older, quiet man named Davis, sat across from Harlan and placed a thin folder on the table between them. He did not open it. "Sergeant Pike," Davis began in a calm, familiar voice, "I'm going to be very direct with you. Your life as you know it is over. The only thing we're here to determine is how much you're willing to cooperate to mitigate the time you'll spend in a federal penitentiary." Harlan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He tried to summon the bravado of his police persona. "I don't know what this is about," he blustered. "I'm a police officer. I have rights. I want my union rep and a lawyer." "You'll get a lawyer," Davis said softly, But let's not waste time with the thin blue line routine. Your badge is worthless in this room. In fact, it's an aggravating factor that will enhance your sentence. You swore to uphold the law, and you used it as a weapon. Davis leaned slightly forward. This is about Darius Voss. Harlan's heart sank. It was him. It was a neighborhood dispute, he stammered. A misunderstanding. Was it a misunderstanding when you used your service baton to cause over $50,000 in damage to his vehicle, Sergeant? Davis asked, his voice still calm, but now edged with steel. Was it a misunderstanding when you told him you didn't want people like him in your neighborhood? Or when you called Captain Grayson and conspired with him to bury the official complaint? Harlan went pale. They knew everything. How could you? Davis smiled, a cold, humorless expression. He reached out and touched a small speaker on the table. He pressed a button. Harlan's voice filled the silent room, tinny and distorted, but unmistakably his. He'll call the station tomorrow, file a vandalism report. It'll go to Captain Grayson. I'll call Fran first thing in the morning. He'll bury it so deep it'll never see the light of day. The recording stopped. Harlan stared at the speaker as if it were a venomous snake. His house. They had bugged his house. In the interrogation room at the other end of the hallway, Sylvia Pike was trying a different tactic. She was playing the hysterical, aggrieved victim. She sat hunched in her chair, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, performing theatrical distress for the agent seated across from her. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "We were asleep. Armed men kicked our door down. I'm a good person. I organized the school bake sale. I'm not a criminal." The agent, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Chen, let her cry for a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Pike," she said in a voice devoid of compassion, "let's talk about yesterday afternoon. Let's talk about the conversation you had with your husband after he destroyed Mr. Voss's car." Sylvia's tears dried as if by magic. Her expression hardened. "My husband was protecting our community. That man was a threat. He was threatening and aggressive." "Aggressive," Agent Chen repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's interesting, because we have a video of the incident. Would you like to see it?" Chen turned a laptop on the table so Sylvia could see it. She pressed play. The screen showed the crisp, high-definition video from Darius's garage camera. It showed Harlan storming onto the property, shouting. The audio was perfect. "We don't have tuned-up cars. We don't have jungle music blasting all day. And we don't have thugs trying to intimidate decent people." Then came the sickening thud of the baton against the hood, followed by the crack of the windshield. Sylvia stared at the screen, her face pale. The video was irrefutable. It showed her husband as the sole aggressor. His words were clear testimony to the racist motive for the attack. That isn't real. It's been edited," she stammered, her voice rising with panic. Agent Chen did not respond. She simply closed the laptop. "The video is real, Mrs. Pike. Just like the audio recording from inside your house where you praised your husband for his criminal acts and encouraged him. That makes you an accessory." Sylvia's bravado shattered. The mask of the righteous suburban matron dissolved, revealing the terrified, cornered bully underneath. The world she had controlled with contempt and social pressure had just been disintegrated by irrefutable high-tech evidence. Back in Harlan's room, Agent Davis slid a photograph across the table. It was a candid photo of Darius Voss at a formal event, laughing with another man. The man was the Attorney General of the United States. "Do you know who Darius Voss is, Sergeant?" Davis asked. Harlan stared at the photo, unable to connect the dots. "Darius Voss," Davis said, lowering his voice to an almost reverent whisper, "is the Assistant United States Attorney for this district. He is one of the most respected federal prosecutors in the country. He makes his living putting men like you in prison. And you, in your infinite wisdom, decided to wage a one-man racial war against him. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the catastrophic magnitude of his stupidity hit Harlan like a physical blow. He felt the room spin. He had picked a fight with the personal family of the most powerful man in law enforcement. He put his head in his hands. It was over. Everything was over. There would be no union representative, no friendly captain to fix it. He had not just stepped on a landmine. He had detonated a nuclear bomb on his own life. The unraveling was complete. All that remained was to calculate the cost. The hours following their interrogations were a slow, methodical dismemberment of the Pikes' lives. While they sat in separate cells, the chilling reality of their situation settling over them like frost, the coordinated power of the federal government was applied fully, not only to their freedom, but to every aspect of their existence. This was not just punishment. This was eradication. This was about making an example so profound that no one in a position of power in the state would ever again think this kind of behavior was acceptable. An independent team from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, armed with arrest warrants signed by a federal judge even before the raid began, arrived at the city police station. Captain Wade Grayson was removed from his post, handcuffed in front of his entire command, a shocking and humiliating spectacle that sent a wave of terror through the department. His career was over, and he now faced his own federal indictment for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The blue wall had not merely been breached, it had been demolished. Simultaneously, a federal prosecutor presented the preliminary evidence to a grand jury. The case was overwhelming, a sure bet built on a mountain of irrefutable video, audio, and financial evidence that the cyber team had extracted from the Pikes' digital lives. The formal indictment was returned before lunch. The charges were devastating. For Harlan Pike, 1 count of committing a hate crime that caused property damage, a serious federal felony. 1 count of conspiracy to deprive a citizen of his civil rights under color of law, significantly enhancing the penalty. 1 count of conspiracy to obstruct justice. After the initial financial audit revealed a pattern of skimming evidence from cash deposits, multiple counts of theft of public property and money laundering were added. For Sylvia Pike, 1 count of conspiracy to deprive a citizen of his civil rights. 1 count of misprision of a felony for her knowledge and concealment of her husband's crimes. 1 count of obstruction of justice. The bake sale organizer was facing years in federal prison. But the criminal charges were only one front in this war. The second front was professional and civil, and it was designed to be equally ruinous. The police chief, facing a public relations nightmare and immense pressure from the Department of Justice, summarily fired Harlan Pike, effective immediately. There was no suspension, no internal investigation. His termination letter cited conduct unbecoming an officer and gross dereliction of duty. His pension was frozen, pending the outcome of the criminal trial. In a single morning, his 15-year career had been erased. By the end of the afternoon, 2 lawyers, one for Harlan and one for Sylvia, both public defenders who looked shocked and lost, were led into a conference room at the local FBI office. Waiting for them were the lead federal prosecutor and a woman they did not recognize. She was from Darius Voss's personal legal team, an expert from the most prestigious civil rights firm in the country. "Gentlemen," the prosecutor began, "your clients are looking at a minimum of 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. The evidence against them is, to put it mildly, irrefutable. We will not be offering a plea deal for Sergeant Pike. For Mrs. Pike, we might consider a sentence reduction in exchange for her full and immediate cooperation." Then the civil attorney spoke. "In addition to the criminal charges," she said in a serene, precise voice, "my client, Mr. Voss, has filed a civil lawsuit against Mr. and Mrs. Pike and a separate lawsuit against the city for negligent supervision. Against the Pikes, we are suing for assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of his civil rights. She slid a thick legal document across the table to each of them. We are seeking compensatory damages, she continued, for the full cost of replacing the damaged vehicle, for the cost of the enhanced security Mr. Voss was forced to install, for the emotional trauma of the racially motivated attack, and for punitive damages to punish the defendants for their malicious and intentional conduct. One of the lawyers flipped to the last page of the document, scanning for the figure. He stopped, jaw slack. "You're seeking $50 million?" he asked in a tone of disbelief. "That is the initial figure for the personal lawsuit," the attorney replied without blinking. "Property damages will be assessed separately and will likely exceed $200,000. And since your client's assets are currently frozen as part of the criminal investigation, we have already filed a lien against their primary residence in Serenity Creek Estates. Whether they are found guilty or not in criminal court, we will win this civil case, and we will take their house." The stunned lawyers fell silent. This was a scorched earth legal strategy. The Pikes were not only going to prison, they were going to lose everything: their house, their savings, their future. They would walk out of prison with only the clothes on their backs and a debt they could never repay. When the lawyers delivered the news to their respective clients in their cells, the reality of their situation finally crushed them. Sylvia, upon learning she would lose her home, the symbol of her entire identity and social standing, broke down in inconsolable sobs. The house was her kingdom, her fortress, the source of her power. Without it, she was nothing. Harlan's reaction was different. Upon hearing the list of charges, the prison sentence, and the financial ruin, he did not cry. A strange, terrifying calm settled over him. At last he understood the magnitude of the power he had provoked. This was not justice. This was selective demolition. He remembered that first day, seeing Darius in his red silk shirt. He had wondered how the man could afford to live in his neighborhood. The irony was a bitter, choking pill. He had questioned his neighbor's wealth, and in doing so, he had guaranteed his own poverty. The price of his hatred. Now he understood. It was everything he had ever had, and everything he would ever have. The calculation was complete, and the result was total annihilation. The trial of the United States versus Pike was brief and brutal. In the sterile mahogany confines of a federal courtroom, the petty tyrant of Serenity Creek Estates looked small, diminished, and utterly pathetic. The case captured the attention of the local media, a salacious story of suburban hate and shocking abuse of power. The courtroom filled daily with reporters, curious neighbors from Serenity Creek, who now looked at the empty Pike house with a mixture of fear and awe and contempt. Activists from civil rights groups, the prosecution, led by Darius's formidable colleague from the U.S. Attorney's Office, presented its case with the cold, methodical precision of a surgeon. They needed no inflammatory rhetoric. The evidence spoke for itself, and it screamed. The first exhibit was the garage video, projected on a giant screen for the jury. The crisp images of Harlan Pike's racist tirade and the subsequent assault on the McLaren silenced the entire room. The sharp, ugly sounds of the baton striking the car echoed through the cavernous courtroom, a soundtrack of pure malice. The jury watched with grim, impassive faces. Next came the audio from the Pikes' dining room. The jurors, wearing headphones, listened as Harlan and Sylvia celebrated and conspired. Their words were a testament to their deep prejudice and their arrogant belief that the law was their personal weapon. Harlan's boastful confession about how Captain Grayson would bury the complaint was particularly damning. Captain Wade Grayson, who had cut a deal with the prosecution and agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence, took the stand. Looking ashamed and defeated, dressed in a prison jumpsuit, he admitted under oath that he had deliberately conspired with Harlan to obstruct justice. His testimony tore down the wall of silence and exposed the informal corruption that had enabled Harlan Pike's behavior for years. When Darius Voss took the stand, silence settled over the room. He was the living image of grace and dignity. Dressed in a simple yet elegant dark gray suit, he recounted the events with the same unshakable calm he had displayed from the beginning. He did not raise his voice. He simply stated the facts. The defense attorney, a public defender who knew he was fighting a lost battle, tried to trip him up during cross-examination. "Mr. Voss," he began, "isn't it true that you were deliberately provocative? That you flaunted your wealth with your expensive car and loud music?" Darius looked at him, then turned to the jury. "I bought a house in a beautiful neighborhood," he said in a clear, firm voice. "I drove a car I purchased with money I earned legally. I listened to music in my own home. If my existence is a provocation, then the problem is not mine. The problem belongs to the person who is provoked." The defense collapsed. They had no counter-argument, no evidence to refute the mountain of prosecution evidence. Harlan Pike did not testify. His lawyer knew that putting him in front of the jury would be professional suicide. Sylvia Pike, as part of her own plea agreement, also did not testify. After 3 brief days, the prosecution rested. The jury was sent to deliberate. They returned in less than 45 minutes. The court clerk took the verdict. "In the case of the United States versus Harlan Pike, on the charge of hate crime, how do you find?" The foreman cleared his throat and looked directly at Harlan. "Guilty." Sylvia, seated in the gallery, let out a choked gasp. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, the clerk continued in a monotone, fatalistic voice. "How do you find?" "Guilty." The litany continued. "Guilty, guilty, guilty." With each pronouncement, Harlan Pike seemed to shrink in his chair, his face pale and sweaty, a mask of disbelief. The judge, a formidable man known for his stern demeanor, thanked the jury, and then turned his steely gaze on the defendant to pronounce sentence. "Mr. Pike," the judge began, his voice heavy with contempt, "you were a sworn law enforcement officer. You were given a badge, a gun, and the trust of this community. You betrayed that trust in the most despicable way possible. You used your power not to protect, but to persecute. You are a disgrace to the uniform you once wore. Based on the severity of the hate crime and the abuse of your official position, I hereby sentence you to 7 years in federal prison." 7 years. Harlan Pike put his head in his hands and wept. The sound of a broken man echoed through the silent courtroom. "Furthermore," the judge added, "this court affirms the civil judgment against you. You will pay Mr. Voss $50 million in damages and restitution for the vehicle. Take him away." As the federal marshals led the sobbing, shattered man from the courtroom, beginning his new life as a convicted felon, Darius Voss stood. He had watched the entire process without the slightest emotion. He did not smile in triumph. He simply looked resolved. He had not sought revenge. He had sought justice. And justice, slow and exhausting, but ultimately inexorable, had been delivered. He turned and walked out of the silent courtroom, leaving behind the ruins of a shattered life. The price of hatred had been paid in full. A year has passed since the trial. Spring has returned to Serenity Creek Estates, revitalizing the quiet, carefully tended streets. The former Pike House, sold at a federal auction to satisfy the civil judgment, now has new owners, a young, diverse family, full of life, who have moved in. Their laughter is a healing sound, a purification of the bitterness that once flooded the property. Darius Voss sits on his porch with a glass of iced tea in his hand. The McLaren, restored to its immaculate original condition, gleams in the driveway. His life is one of peace, a peace he fought for and won. The neighborhood has changed. The horrific incident forced a reckoning. People are kinder, more open. The hard shell of their exclusive bubble has cracked, and a little of the real world has been allowed in. He had not only brought down a bully, he had changed the system, exposing a deep rot. He had shown that in the face of intolerance, the most powerful response is not to sink to its level, but to rise so high that its ugliness is exposed for the entire world to see. What do you think of the sentence Harlan Pike received? Was 7 years a fair reflection of his crimes? And what does it say about a person whose first instinct upon seeing a successful neighbor is not inspiration, but hatred? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story of poetic justice and unbreakable dignity moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button and subscribing for more important stories.